HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson, and we are in a stretch of Arkansas's the non-conference schedule in the Hogs basketball season is kind of grinding down to that part of December where you've got a week between games. Sometimes, in some cases, coming up, you'll have 9 days between games, and so not as much sense of urgency to talk about the next game. And Arkansas's got a couple of low quad opportunities here to finish up a 13 game non-conference schedule. So there's not as much urgency right now to talk about the opponents, and it's probably a good time to talk a little more recruiting, which we're going to do today. But I am going to talk about sort of not really a state of the program. You could call it that, I guess, maybe more like a status report update on where things stand with this team. We're going to talk about the SEC, and it's an historic season, not only for the SEC, which has been a better and better and better league year in and year out, but in terms of the entire college landscape, where conferences like the Big 12 or the Big 10, for years and years, it was the ACC. At one point in time, it was the original Big East. Never before. We've seen those conferences be maybe at the top of the mountaintop for consistent seasons. I don't think we've ever seen a single season with this much top to bottom dominance from one conference as we're seeing in the SEC this year. So it's really a perfect time to talk about that because every SEC team's about to turn the page to league play, which will be a bloodbath. I'm really envisioning the parity in this league is so great. I'm envisioning some interesting scenarios that'll probably play out. And I don't think when we say there's not a night off in the SEC, we used to say that there's not a weekend off in the football aspect of it. This will be there's not a night off. In football, you play once a week, 12 times a year. In basketball, you've got 18 games. You've got conference games, and so you've got in football it's 8. So you got more than twice as many opportunities to play in your league, which would lend itself to, well, there'll be some nights that aren't so tough. Now, you may end up winning some blowout games, but I think this SEC is so good that you can't look at any game and feel comfortable going into it that's a W. That's how good the league is. I don't know that any league's ever been able to really make that claim. There's usually some bottom feeders in basketball, anybody can upset you, but I don't know that there are going to be games where you look at it in your next 2 games in the upcoming week and say, we should win that game. I really think it's that good, and that's really kind of a scary notion. We're going to talk a little bit to look ahead at Arkansas's upcoming prospects for a non-conference schedule next season because Calipari's been on the record, mainly on his radio show that he does every Monday, talking about, kind of throwing some hints out there of what's to come for Arkansas's non-conference schedule. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. I put a tweet out a few days ago about some of my wish list matchups for the Hogs in a non-conference. And speaking of the SEC, it's been talked about. I don't know that it's been ratified. It's being seriously considered to move from an 18-game SEC slate to 20. If that does happen, then you're going to go from having 13 non-conference games to 11. So that will impact how many marquee matchups you go after. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And really the other thing, after we do recruiting first, we're probably going to jump then into where things kind of stand with this Arkansas team. Yeah, TB is a different guy this year. Well, we'll see. You want to see consistency from him. I intentionally used him in my thumbnail photo for this segment as part of my overall theme for this Arkansas team. I still think there's a lot of unknowns now that we're already 11 games into the season, barely more than a third of the way. Again, 2 more non-conference games before you jump into SEC play. And so we're going to talk about the team after we talk recruiting, and then we're going to get into the SEC, kind of maybe some back and forth with this current Arkansas team and the SEC, and then we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming non-con to wrap things up. Once again, thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. If you haven't done it already, thank you, Jessica Davis and it fades before I can read it. Hog Docs maybe for early comments. I appreciate thoughts and interaction. I'm not real good at my end of the interaction, but I thank you for the comments. So let's get into it with recruiting real quick. Let's just sum up where things are in the latest with Muhammad Silla, class of 2025, National number 13 player, according to On3 Sports. 247 has him as the 30th best player in that class of 2025. We know Arkansas has a top 5 rated class nationally overall. When you look at where things stand from the early period, Darius Acuff Jr., Malik Thomas, lead guard, off guard, both top 7 rated players nationally, both 5 stars, plus Isaiah Sealy out of Northwest Arkansas. Springdale, a top 50th player according to ESPN. That's a backcourt that is the number 1 recruited backcourt in the country. I've said it many times. And then it also is strong enough that it represents right now a top 5 rated class when you look at it from a team ranking standpoint. So that's the early period. Muhammad Silla would be a 4th edition, a guy that is Arkansas's in his final 5. He's visited everybody in his top 5 or final 5 schools: Arkansas, Kansas, Oregon, Washington, and Georgia Tech. And we've talked a little bit about that. Arkansas got the final visit. I thought it was an odd timing on the visit, a couple or so weeks ago. And he may be nearing a decision soon, which has led to me talking about the possibility of maybe being a midterm guy. Then you have the ability to redshirt him and get him acclimated to your program if it played out that way. I don't have intel to suggest that. It's just the timing of something, and a decision coming soon makes me think that it could very well be he wants to make a decision. He's ready to, and he's just going to have to wait till the spring to actually sign. If he's not a midterm grad, or if he didn't already sign, which we've seen some players make announcements late after the signing period was over and they'd actually signed, and so they're already kind of done the paperwork. So, who knows how that plays out? I think Arkansas is among the top 2 or 3 teams there. I've mentioned this before on these subjects. Maybe Kansas is backed away over some for various reasons due to how they want to use their NIL money in the portal. But big men come at a premium. This is a 6'10", pushing 6'11", long, athletic, quick, long strider, a guy that is a more traditional in the paint kind of player. He's right down Cal's alley in terms of the kind of guys he goes after. So keep an eye on Muhammad Silla. We know he had that visit on December 1st. I think the news earlier this week is that Chin Coleman, Arkansas associate head coach, was out in Las Vegas at the Tarkanian Classic, where Silla is performing with Bella Vista Prep out of Arizona. Had a nice game, I think a 15-point game, did some other stuff, blocked some shots. Very efficient shooting game for him. I think he was 6 of 8 from the field, 3 or 4 from the foul line when Coleman was out to see him. So we tweeted that. I'd heard Arkansas was out there, and then I found a photo. And the background, Silla's going up for a dunk, and in the background on the baseline, you see Chin Coleman against the wall over there. So that's how I knew which Arkansas staffer it was. So Arkansas continues. The fact that Arkansas was there, I'm told Dana Altman of Oregon was there. I'm not sure if any other head coaches in his top 5 schools went out to see him or not. I do know that Altman was out to see him. I've been told Georgia Tech out of that top 5 is one to really keep an eye on. Maybe Oregon is too, if Altman is putting on, showing up for games. A lot of this too is location. Oregon's on the West Coast. Las Vegas isn't far. A team schedule the college team schedule, if there's enough of a break there, a head coach might be able to leave his team. You never know what all the factors going into it, but certainly he's down to a final 5. So we'll keep an eye on Ahmed Silla. I think it would be a great get for Arkansas to have a front court piece. Let's say that it's Arkansas. This would be Calipari's first frontline high school commitment since coming to Arkansas. Everything else has been backcourt. The guys he brought with him from his signed Kentucky class, we know this, are guards and wings. We just talked about what Arkansas got in the early period. You could certainly get big men out of the portal. Arkansas has done that when you look at this current roster. But I think it would be good, too, to maybe, if you're going to go 4 deep, as many as 4 high school players, which Calipari has expressed he'll do. And again, I think you can exceed that. Nate Ament, the 5 stars, the next I'm talking about. We know the last time we were on, we talked about the fact that Calipari had just recently been back out there the day after Arkansas had knocked off Michigan, 14th ranked Michigan in Madison Square Garden in the Jimmy V Classic. Calipari was back out to Virginia to see Nate Ament. This could be a Duke thing for Nate Ament. That's where most people see that headed. But I think Arkansas's, again, at the top 2 or 3, probably right up there. If it's not Duke, Arkansas has a great shot maybe to landing, but you got to get him on campus for a visit. I think that's to come. I've got one source connected with the NBA that told me he heard that Ahmed's coming in to attend an Arkansas game at some point. It only makes sense that that plays out into SEC play in one of those marquee games. Be the best time to do that. We went through the last time we were on some of the home schedule games, like and especially on Saturdays. Florida is a Saturday game. Oklahoma, I believe, is a Saturday game. Alabama's probably the big one that gets the most splash there. There's some other opportunities, and there are some midweek games if it turns out to be a midweek type of visit. Sometimes that happens. As players on the high school level that you're recruiting are also got their schedule to work around to find time to go take a trip to take a visit. So keep an eye on Nate Ament. We're just kind of covering some stuff we already did. I think the update here is on Silla and the fact that Arkansas was out to see him again earlier this week in the Tarkanian Classic. And then Mika Murnin, class of 2026. We know he visited Arkansas. He's considering a reclass to 2025. A 6'10", 6'11" combo forward. Nate Ament, I didn't mention, out of Virginia, 6'9" combo forward. Both Ament and Murnin are perimeter skill guys. Murnin more of a translatable 4-5 in the college game because he's pushing 6'11" and is a shot blocker and a guy that can defend the rim and rebound at a high volume, but he's also a very skilled and polished perimeter player. Class of 2026. Both guys are top 5 rated 5-stars in their classes. I think if Murnin decides to reclass, I think he'll be a top 10 rated player if he moves to 25, which is saying a lot because it's a loaded 2025 class. I think he's in that conversation to be slotted that way if he does reclass. These are decisions usually made at the end of the year, in the spring. There's been talk that Murnin may decide he's going to reclass over the holiday break. That's not a reason to think, well, that he might enroll at a school, because he can't. I mean, he's still got, he's basically got to finish out the year to have enough credits, I'm thinking, to even be eligible to miss a whole year, preempted by a year. And so, but it's probably a situation where you may have to wait till the spring to learn what his decision is. And he's going to probably take more visits. He took Utah, Michigan, and Arkansas. And he, a source that spoke directly with him told me, he said the Arkansas visit was by far the best. He postponed or canceled a visit a week later after the Arkansas visit. This was late September for Arkansas, to Duke. And so we don't know if he'll make that up and go to Duke. Kentucky was one that was trying to get him to visit, maybe there. I've got one source that thinks Utah's the team to beat. So, but that one again could play out for a while, but that's another frontline option. And I still view Ament as a frontline option. I see him as predominantly a 3 on the NBA level, kind of like a Michael Porter Jr., that in small ball lineups, the right fit, can play a small ball 4, but kind of slotted as your 3. At the college level, I see him as a 3-4 combo, and a guy that could be on the court with 2 or 3 other guards, or 2 guards and a wing, and then him as a versatile 4 guy in certain kind of lineups and personnel packages. So I would call him, you could argue he's a frontline piece. So we'll see if Calipari gets a frontline guy out of the high school ranks. Again, most of these are probably going down to the spring in terms of a decision. I guess it could happen sooner, but it certainly most likely be the spring before you can get somebody signed. And, then it's just a matter of weeks before you move them on campus to start their freshman year. All right, so we went through the stuff we've talked about a lot. We're almost 15 minutes in. Thanks again for joining me. Let's go through some of the stuff this week. I was able to confirm yesterday. I tweeted this out. Arkansas assistant coach Chuck Martin has been very busy this week. He has been on the road. A couple of days ago, went out to see Abdou Toure, a 6'6" wing at a Notre Dame high school in Connecticut. Toure took an unofficial visit to Arkansas the weekend of October 18th through the 20th. If you remember, that was the same weekend that Chris Sinak Jr., the big man, the 5-star in the 2025 class, took his official visit to Arkansas, ended up committing to Houston, signing with Houston in the early period, made his announcement a week after the early period, but he'd already signed, so he's done. But Toure was in on that weekend, and I talked a lot about him. Very versatile guy. I think he played for Guinea in the World Cup, in the FIBA World Cup over the summer, and had some insane scoring games. And then in that Under Armour Elite Next 24 All-Star game with 2025 guys from 2026, he's in the class of 2026. but he hit the game-winning shot in that, and it was in one of those Elam endings where it was tied at 94, first team to get to 97 wins, and he hit a ball fake on a kick out. Nice ball fake, took his time, knocked down a three, game over. And he had a double-digit scoring game, and he really impressed me throughout that game leading up to that. But he's had a really strong. That was just part of a really strong spring and summer. Arkansas coaches have been recruiting him. They offered him back in the summer, and he took that unofficial visit. Well, Martin was out to see him in his season opener. I guess his Notre Dame has a delayed. I don't know if they've been playing games and he just wasn't available for some reason. I don't have data on that, but he had his season opener 2 days ago and scored 42 points. And Chuck Martin was there to see that. So Arkansas, the continuity now, when we talk about what Martin's doing this week, it's a lot of guys out of that 2026 class. Caleb Holt, a player that Calipari out in Atlanta, Huntsville, Alabama, basically, a top five rated 5-star in that 2026 class. Calipari was courtside to watch him compete in the Adidas session event back in May when I was there, and I was there watching both Holt and keeping an eye on Calipari courtside, watching him compete. Class of 2026, another 6'5", 6'6" wing, again out of Huntsville, Alabama at Grayson High School. So Calipari was courtside back in the spring watching him, and has continued when the recruiting period opened up in early September. Been on the road now to see him in Atlanta, and was seeing other players that he's recruiting like Malik Thomas and Caleb Wilson, who we know Arkansas is out of the mix for now. But Caleb Holt's been a guy he's consistently gone out to see, and Holt's performing this week in the City of Palms event, a big high school event with a lot of the top teams and players in the country. Martin's been courtside to see him play with Grayson. I mentioned Torrey a couple of days ago. Jalen Montnati out of Owasso, Oklahoma, is a fringe 5-star. He was a top 10 rated guy for a while, top 15. Some of the services now having between 20 and 25. Some of them have dropped him to a 4-star, but he's a composite 5-star, composite top 25 guy, a 6'7" wing out of Owasso, Oklahoma. The previous Arkansas staff was recruiting him. Arkansas, this staff is recruiting him. Martin was courtside to watch him play. Had a really good game in Owasso, in a close win. I think that was yesterday. And then Alex Constanza. Now, I've seen all these guys play in person, and Constanza is one I saw in Pine Bluff last year at the King Cotton Holiday Classic out of Westminster High School out of Miami as a sophomore, 6'8" wing, just a super versatile guy. Love his game, but he's another guy that Martin has seen in that class of 2026. He's a top 15 rated 5-star. And he's kind of been more of he hasn't been on Arkansas's campus that I'm aware of. And I'd know if he had been. But he's a guy that's kind of been under the radar. We haven't talked about him as much. We've talked about Caleb Holt, Abdu Torrey. I have talked about Constanza. We've talked about Montnati, but Constanza not as much. But all of these guys, again, top shelf guys, class of 2026. And when you look at the size ranges on these 4 names in that class, Holt, Torrey, Constanza, and Montnati, you've got a 6'6" to 6'8" range in wing players. In wing players. And so all of those guys, all 3 of them are more comparable to guys like Carter Knox and Billy Richmond, not necessarily in how they play. Some of these guys have a little more shooting skill. Some of them maybe a little more athleticism and mid-range bag. But the idea is they would slot as wings for Arkansas, and that's the comparison when I look at those guys. And so when we were talking about the 3 names, Scylla, a frontline piece at the 5, a Mint 3-4, Murinen 4-5, you're talking about more frontline pieces to round out class of 25. These 4 2026 guys I just went through again are guys that would be project wing for you. But speaking of that, there's a 5th name, and we know this, Jashawn J.J. Andrews, the 6'7" wing out of Little Rock Christian Academy that has an Arkansas offer. Calipari's prioritized him, has been on campus in person to see him at Little Rock Christian Academy, has been on the circuit spring and summer to see him, including Peach Jam, where Andrews really blew up, had a great Peach Jam. There was a case for him to be the MVP. It went to Murinen. They're teammates for Brad Bill Elite. Brad Bill Elite program, a great program, put out a lot of great players and never won a Peach Jam at any level. Won the 16U level. Jashawn J.J. Andrews, big part of that. right after that event, he got his Arkansas offer, and then that recruitment's been kind of off and running. He had a visit planned for Arkansas in October, that 18th to the 20th weekend we just talked about, but postponed that. And then shortly after that, pretty quickly arrived at a new visit. It'll be an official visit the 29th of this month. It's coming up in a week or so. What's today? The 20th? The 19th? Yeah, so a little over a week. He starts that visit the 29th to the 31st. Arkansas smack dab in the middle of that, host Oakland in the final non-conference game. It's a storyline there. Oakland, not a juggernaut so far this season, but a tough team, a tough matchup, especially the way they play defense. But Oakland upset Kentucky last year in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So there's some storylines there, but that'll be the game. Andrews told me he wanted his visit. He preferred actually to come during basketball season. The October 18th to the 20th visit didn't accommodate that, and he wanted to attend a basketball game. So he's done that. He just attended Arkansas's neutral site win in their last outing. Well, technically, it'll be counted as a home win over UCA in North Little Rock. That's across the river from where he lives and attends school. So he was there with his family to attend that game. He'll also again be at the Oakland game on the 30th. It's in the middle of that official visit, and he's a guy that I think, because of the way that he's been prioritized, and Calipari's vision for how he wants to recruit in-state players, there's a lot of good players in state. Only two had offers. Sealy was the first, and that was right before Andrews got his. Sealy in class of 2025, Andrews in 26. So I really think, even though there's other teams that Andrews is visiting, he'll have other visits, some scheduled after Arkansas. It's my gut that Arkansas is the team to beat there. I don't have any inside information to suggest that I know that Arkansas is the leader there. It's my instinct, based on Calipari's work, based on the value of Andrews, as ESPN ranks him the 15th best player in the country, a 5-star. If I were going to make a player comparison, just looking at this current Arkansas team, I look at the motor, will, determination of a guy like a Duke Thiero at that 3-4 combo. I would make a comparison there with Andrews. I think Andrews' skill level as a shooter is emerging enough where there's a case to be made that at some point he's probably a better shooter than Thiero. Thiero's a little bigger right now, but remember, Andrews is big, pretty good sized, and only getting bigger. But he's also a younger guy, so as he continues to develop, he'll continue to add still to that Superman body that he already has. Just a relentless rim runner, rebound attacker, 50-50 ball guy. And when you see a Duke Thiero, you see that kind of a player, and you see that he's needed more as a 4 on this Arkansas team, especially on a thin front line already that's had injuries. But again, I think Andrews would plug in as that kind of guy you could put on the wing, and in small ball be your 4, and really do some damage. So I think Arkansas, my instinct is Arkansas might be the team to beat there. And again, he doesn't have to make a decision anytime soon. He's class of 2026, and he's taking his visit at the end of this month. At the same time, would I be shocked if he made a commitment announcement to Arkansas on a timeline that was, maybe a little more aggressive than normal for a 5-star? I wouldn't be. I don't expect it. I don't plan on that. I'm just throwing it in there as, who knows, maybe not. But either way, I think at the end of the day, I've got to favor Arkansas on that recruitment. All right, so we've gone through recruiting now. I spent a lot of time on that. I do like to typically feature recruiting. This Arkansas team right now, man, it's hard to know where to start because so much of this is part of the discussion about how good the SEC is, and we're about to get to that. Arkansas right now, 48th in net coming into today. The resume doesn't have a bad loss. There are no quad 3 or quad 4 losses. There's some clunky performances against quad 3 and quad 4 teams. There's that. But Arkansas is trending up. Arkansas has won 4 in a row, all in December. It's a chance by winning the next 2. I haven't even mentioned North Carolina A&T on Saturday. Arkansas is 3-0 all time against the Aggies. The first of those wins was in the first round of the 93-94 NCAA tournament. And we all know what happened then. That was the start of a 6-0 winning streak. You win 6 games in the NCAA tournament, you're a national champion. That's what happened for the Razorbacks. The program's first and only title in basketball back in 93, 94, but North Carolina A&T, just a little history, was the opening round opponent. Arkansas will play. The Aggies look to move to 4-0 all time in that series, which I expect Arkansas will. It's a 3-9 team ranked down in the 300s, which has been typical of some of the. I mean, Arkansas right now is 6-0 against Quad 4. Is that right? Maybe 5-0. They're 3-0 against Quad 3. That's 4 wins. They've got 9 total. So they're 5-0 right now against Quad 4. Would be 6-0 by beating North Carolina A&T against Quad 4. It's not going to help the resume. They win over UCA by 20 points, and it feels like it should be counted as a neutral site game, but it's not. It counts as a home game. Arkansas lost a little ground after that win over Michigan in net, just by virtue of how bad the net ranking is and other teams improving their net by playing a little better competition. In some cases, you look at some of the names of some of these mid majors or low Division One, maybe go, well, what's the difference? Well, the net rankings. I mean, there's a strategy in how you set some of those what should be bye wins. Projecting some of the not having too many that are ranked in the 300s. Arkansas had several of those, so it hurts the net a little bit. Nonetheless, some of the good news, not only does Arkansas have a 4-game winning streak, undefeated so far in December, you win the next 2 to close out non-conference play. You went 6-0 December. It's the first undefeated December for Arkansas in 4 years. And it's significant because it's not all low and mid-major Division I teams that you're beating up at home. That could be, you need context with that. Arkansas won a road game against an ACC team in the challenge to open up this winning streak. Yeah, it's not a very good one, and it's only a Quad 3 win. So the loss would have been brutal on the resume, but you didn't do that. You won, but it counts as an away from home win, and that goes into your total body of work. The net rankings are the biggest tool analytically that the committee is going to use, but it's not the only thing. And they're going to look at your overall body of work and how did you do away from home. That Miami win's big there, aside from just that you didn't take on a bad loss. And then the win over Michigan. Michigan last night really could have maybe spruced Arkansas's net a little bit by pulling out a win over Oklahoma. Still unbeaten Sooners after a 4-point play on Oklahoma's final offensive possession. The Sooners were able to flip a 3-point deficit and win by a point. Came down to the wire just like the Arkansas game did. Was also a neutral site game played in North Carolina. I think in Charlotte maybe. But that was a game Michigan led most of the way. They led most of the game against Arkansas. It was a lot of back and forth and roller coaster, and Arkansas built an 18-point lead. Oklahoma was lucky to have small leads very early and then late in the game, the final 5 minutes, and it was never more than a 4-point lead for Oklahoma. And then Michigan went back in front, again, was up 3 with under 30 seconds left. And Jeremiah Fears, 30 points, had the 4-point play, made 3, fouled, hit the free throw. Man, the SEC, we're going to, again, talk about that, but my goodness, Michigan loses. Michigan's still a top 25 team in net. It's still a Quad 1 win going back to Arkansas. You've got a quality win in non-conference. You're on a winning streak, and if you take care of business in the next 2 games, you don't have any bad losses going into SEC play. So there's positives there. The net, again, is not real strong right now, but you're going to have, I've looked at this, and we're going to talk SEC in a little bit, but where Arkansas sits right now, if I were looking at what Arkansas has done, we've talked about the wins and losses so much. We know the 2 losses to Illinois and Baylor and some of the clunky performances against some of these other teams. But if I were looking at it right now, I understand why Arkansas is still close to the bubble, off of it because of that win over Michigan and this winning streak and the win over Miami. According to Lenardi, Arkansas for a couple of weeks there was a 10 seed last 4 bye. The next week, even after winning a couple of games, including the Miami win, Arkansas slid to a last 4 in and a play-in 11 seed. The win over Michigan and then taking care of business against UCA, Lenardi's projection this week has upgraded Arkansas to a 9 seed. So technically off the bubble, but really not far from being right back on it. And so I would say that's about right. I'd say Arkansas is probably, based on the body of work, I think the biggest thing, if I were given a status update, is what is the status of guys' availability? Arkansas hasn't been at full strength, really. They haven't been at full strength, really, even in games where they've had everybody technically trot on the floor and clock some minutes. and it's really mostly been the front line. I mean, it's been a combination of mostly Jonas Adu, missed games by each of Trevor and Brazil, a couple of games of Visic, Big Z, one game, Adu Thero, at least one game, limited minutes in other games due to whatever. It's been mostly injuries, but illness with Thero recently. And so I think part of why it's not that I can't envision Arkansas being a better team and not being near a bubble projection is based on the individual parts if you have all of them together. But Arkansas doesn't have all the individual parts together, and the front line is so thin. The Hogs can't really afford to proceed like they have been because the schedule gets much tougher. Every night it's going to be a bloodbath in the SEC. It's just going to be that way. That's not to say you're not going to catch fire and beat the brains out of somebody in there. It might happen to you too. You might catch it on a bad night. The point is going into it, and so I think it makes it tougher with a nine deep roster. It was a decision that was made. I don't know that anybody envisioned the SEC being this good or Arkansas struggling with injuries or illness, but we always thought it was likely to come up at some point. And so far through 11 games, it has been a theme every single game. So to me, that's the biggest question mark. I think that's a question mark. But technically right now, Arkansas is not a bubble team, so they control their own destiny. The Hogs can continue to move away from that or, kind of middle it and stay right there. Right now, they're not on it. I think the other thing outside of injuries, if I were looking at question marks, is we're going to talk about the strengths. I still think it's Nelly Davis. Look, I think he's gotten more comfortable in terms of shot selection, how he kind of fits into the way Arkansas plays right now. But here was a guy that was brought in to be, if not your primary scorer, you're thinking 15 points a game. You saw the efficiency and other that he brought with him, and you're thinking he's going to have a bigger role. I think Arkansas has two primary shot creators on offense. I don't see anybody on Arkansas's front line as a shot creator. All right. I see Jonas Adu as an opportunistic scorer. I see Trevor Brazil as mostly an opportunistic scorer. I see Big Z as a guy in two-man game that when he pops, and whether you're guarding him or not, he might take a three on you. But he needs an entry pass to get a shot around the basket. He needs some kind of interaction with a guard, to get a shot. He's not really creating shots. Adu Thero, I guess you could say, is a shot creator. I see him as an opportunistic scorer too. I don't see him being a three-level shot creator. I see him as kind of a one-trick pony in terms of muscling his way, agility, athleticism, bulk, and that determination. I mean, that motor, getting downhill. He's an A to B slasher. And three things are going to happen. You're either going to cut off his drive and he's going to struggle changing direction. He loses his balance. He gets small when he has to change direction. He leans and falls. He might turn it over, but if you don't stop him, he's going to get on for a dunk, a layup, or you're going to foul him, and he's shooting free throws. And then that's kind of an unknown there on what's going to happen at that free throw line. Arkansas's two shot creators are number one, Boogie Flan, and I think DJ Wagner. DJ Wagner's gotten better from three. He's a solid three-point shooter based on the body of work so far, much better than he was last year dealing with that ankle injury. But he creates shots in his float game, his little pull-up game in the paint, or getting all the way to the basket. He does a really good job on his drives of getting to those finishing angles, using the glass. He'll go high glass. He's finished lefty. He'll change directions a little bit. He's not as shifty as Boogie Flan. Boogie Flan's got some Kyrie Irving. There's some the kid that played at Vanderbilt that's at Cleveland in the NBA, Garland. There's some Garland in him a little bit, maybe there, a little comparison you can make. But then he's Arkansas's top shot creator. So Nelly Davis, going back to Nelly, he was a guy I thought you could run some offense through him. And that really hasn't been the case. He's been mostly an off-ball guy and really kind of not a 1A or 1A option guy. He's been more of that third guy in that starting backcourt. And, he's thawed out some. He's averaging, I think, 10 points over the last 6 games. And you're like, well, that's not great. No, it's better than what happened the first 5 games. His shot selection, he looks more comfortable. He's got a nice-looking stroke. His misses look like they're going in. And Arkansas's had guys that took a while. Stanley and Moody was one of those guys that when he got into SEC play, he was actually better than he was in non-conference, and it was to such a level on a team that really JD Notae was kind of your primary everything on offense, and then Jalen Williams on the front line was that jack of all trades guy, not an explosive scorer, kind of a double double guy, 10 and 11 guy, but Amude stepped up, and so is there a path for that for Nelly? I think when we talk about Arkansas's availability of players, the next big talking point is is there something in him that leads you to think that he can be a guy that can be a guy that can help you finish games in terms of running through him or going to him? And now the defense is calling timeouts because they got to figure out how they're going to deal with him and how they're going to scheme you, because that's a problem outside of just Boogie Flan and even DJ Wagner. I probably talked about that one a little bit too much, but by the same token, I think it's valid to wonder. I'm not criticizing the player. The role he's got right now has helped Arkansas. You got to remember, you only had really 3 or 4 tough games mixed in with games that have been tougher than they should have been. When it's night in and night out against better competition relative to what you've seen night in and night out in non-conference play, the talent level is commensurate. The depth, the coaching, all that. Nelly was a guy that was envisioned as that kind of player that could put you on his back. He hasn't been that yet, so I just throw that out there as one of the things I'm looking at. Arkansas is still ranked 23rd according to KenPom, and I looked at it this morning. In defensive efficiency, they've moved out of the 70s. I think they were in the 80s and 70s in offense. They've gotten better. They're in the mid-50s there, so they've improved in the offensive ratings. But what's interesting is Arkansas, top 35 to 50 when you start looking at steals per game, blocks per game, those hustle stats on defense. Arkansas doesn't foul a lot, so they don't put teams on the free throw a lot. I think they're 16th in the country in how many free throw attempts they allow per game for opponents. We'll see how much that increases or changes once they start playing tougher teams to guard. Because we know that Michigan and Illinois were tough to guard because they scored 90 and 87 points respectively. Illinois 90, Michigan 87. And Arkansas obviously beat Michigan and scored 89 in that 89-87 win. But sometimes the defense against better teams hasn't necessarily been one that looks like top 23, but that's where it is right now in the full body of work. Arkansas also, not only is it not foul, this is not a good offensive rebounding team, Arkansas. A lot of Calipari's best teams have been. This one's not. We'll see if it improves now that you're getting more and more of Edu and Brazil in the mix. But it's not a team that gives up a lot of offensive rebounds either. Earlier in the year, there may have been a couple of games where it was an issue, but overall it hasn't been, including some of these big rebounding teams like Illinois, who at the time led the nation in rebounding. Offensive rebounding was a big part of that, and Arkansas has held its own in that department, but 7.9 offensive rebounds per game for opponents puts Arkansas in a very high percentile in terms of limiting offensive rebounds. So defensively, there's good things in the steals and the blocks, not limiting fouls, putting teams on the free throw line, keeping those numbers down, limiting offensive rebounds. Arkansas is doing a good job on field goal percentage defense. If you look at teams from 3-point land overall, I know Illinois went nuts in that game. And there may be 1 or 2 other games where the percentage wasn't great defensively, but Arkansas at 30.7 is in the, around top 100 in the country. Or, I'm not sure exactly where that lands, but it's not bad. It's top 1/3 defensively. So there are some good things on that. When you look at this Arkansas team right now, again, we're not sure because everybody hasn't been all hands on deck for every game, how much better it can be. But this team looks better. They're looking like a team that can be good. Some would argue that they are good right now. When I did my segment on Drive Time Sports on Tuesday, I do that once a week. And Rick Schaefer, a longtime Arkansas guy, that he was the SID up there for years and still involved with covering the football games on the radio. He asked me if I thought Arkansas was a good team right now. And I said, well, I'm almost there. I said, I'm not quite ready to say I need to see a little more. And after I answered, he says, well, I think they're a good team right now. I think you can go ahead and say that. So it's not that we're in full disagreement. I just think that there's still more for this Arkansas team to show, but they're trending that way. The winning streak has got some quality stuff in there. and you're getting guys like Adu back in Brazil, who's probably playing his best basketball. Those are two more positive offensively. Before we talk about a little bit more on these individual players, Arkansas at 37.2% from three. That ranked 67th in Division One. I know it looked for a while like that was going to be a big question mark, and it may still be. I don't think Arkansas has pure shooter, go-to shooter type of guys. I think Nelly Davis is probably the closest to being that kind of guy as an off, because he's been mostly off the ball. But he hasn't taken a ton of volume of shots, and the way other guys are taking shots and the way that the flow has worked so far, I'm not seeing where and how that's going to change just yet. But having said that, 37.2% is good. Top 67th in the country. Overall field goal percentage, Arkansas at 51%, 50.9. That ranks 8th in Division One. Arkansas 71% on low volume of free throw attempts. Those are things that, and not being a good offensive rebounding team. And then the turnover issues Arkansas has had, that's probably the biggest problem on offense, are the unforced errors. When I look at it, Arkansas's turnovers, over 12 per game, 12 and a half per game, and really most of them are unforced. It's just guys not being on the same page. And then I can go back to the talking point. How much of that is not having the same available group on the floor all the time? And your rotation minutes being a little bit skewed because you're having to wait guys with more minutes that normally maybe wouldn't be in what you'd like to see. Guys not being able to practice together. They haven't scrimmaged a lot. I mean, are these things that get better, or is this just a team that has shown us this is who they are? They're going to be an unforced error type of team, and they're going to have to overcome it. Arkansas has been really good in transition, a top 20 team in transition scoring. A lot of that's been off those steals and live ball turnovers. Even in games where Arkansas didn't separate itself much in the turnover game, they still got out in transition because they were running off makes and misses. They weren't necessarily feeding just off live ball turnovers and getting those easy scores that way. So those are things I'm paying attention to. But I think Arkansas's problems on offense, we went through some of it statistically, but I think those unforced errors, that lead to live ball turnovers and easy scores for the other team, it starts shrinking your margins and what should be strengths on that your defense is providing if your offense is just kind of handing it back over. Again, if it's unforced stuff, if it's shooting yourself in the foot, it's less about what the opponent did to put you in that, and it's more about we need to really tighten this up and clean it up a little bit, because you don't have to be perfect, but if you clean it up by some measure, then your margins start to grow in these transition and points off turnovers and some of these other areas, points in the paint. They get a little bigger, and sometimes that's the difference between winning and losing, because believe me, those margins are going to be tight when you get into SEC play. I think some of the positives I went on about Nelly Davis and is, to me, him maybe taking that next step makes Arkansas a final weekend of the season of the NCAA tournament kind of team. I guess that's kind of where I was going with that. Arkansas right now, not far off the bubble. I understand that. I can't make a projection. Oh, that's going to change. I think it can. I think it can be even as good as final weekend potentially, but that, to me, a lot of that really falls on a guy like, where's that Nelly Davis we thought might be what he is. Look, it's not just our own misconstrued ideas. This guy is a National Player of the Year watch list guy on all the big ones coming into this season, an all SEC projection coming into the season. And so it's not like he's playing poorly. It's just not what we envision yet. So again, that on the flip side of that, Jonas Adu, in the minutes he's getting now, he's bringing what I thought he would. He looks like an all SEC potential on the defensive part of it, like he was last year at Tennessee, and a guy that can give you 11 and 12 points a game and between 6 and 8 rebounds a game. And those averages are where he slotted last year at Tennessee. He's going to fill in as that kind of guy as long as he's healthy. He's getting better and better, and he gives Arkansas paint presence. He carves out space. He's not a movable guy, and he's contesting shots. He's blocking some shots. He'll get rebounds that you didn't see those kind of rebounds Arkansas getting unless it was a Adu Thero. But Jonas Adu, to me, is starting to show the value that we thought he would have. And so that is a huge positive. You just hope he gets healthy, fully healthy, and stays that way. Trevor Brazil's playing his best basketball right now. Now the question mark is consistency. Can he stay away from the injury bug? It has haunted him since he's been in Arkansas. That's a valid thing. Some guys are, I mean, I can go through the list of former Hogs, guys that are still playing that left the program. I can look at in the past. I mean, these things happen. Can he get away from that? Can he finally get past it? The other thing is when you do have him available, he kind of is in and out in terms of impact, production, and but lately he's just been building on going back to the Miami game, and since that time he's just been building on not only production but these interesting blue collar plays in the paint, tip ins from 6 feet away. I remember that at Miami was one of the he's getting to the rim more. That big block and coming down with that rebound in traffic at the end of the Michigan game that you could say won the game. I mean, Vlad Golden was right in front of the basket. He hits that shot, and now, that changes the whole thing. At that point, Arkansas is only up 1, and now they're playing with a deficit. I don't remember how much time was left, but it was in the last seconds. I mean, Brazil's starting to do things that in his defensive versatility, his ability to switch and defend now on the perimeter. Yeah, maybe he's not the most physical guy still, but there's other things that his gifts allow him to do, and it seems to fit in better with what Calipari is doing out there and what he wants. So kudos to Trevor Brazil. I think the front line, if they're healthy, is a strength. Is a strength. I would say the backcourt is still the overall strength, but the front line's not chalk liver if it's all hands on deck. And this allows Big Z to have a role, where he's not counted on so much to anchor the front line, because he's not a front line anchor. He's a stretch 5 or a 7-2 guard right now. So they got to continue to work. Now he'll block some shots, but they got to continue to work on that. The other thing I like, I've spent so much time talking about availability. You had 7 days between games with UCA and North Carolina A&T. Your staff can get out on the road and recruit. We talked about that. But you also guys can heal up, rest up, get better, treatment, those kind of things. You can load manage what they're doing right now. And you don't have the toughest opponents where you can afford to, it makes it harder to do that. And then after this game against North Carolina A&T, again, it's 9 days between that game on December 21st at Bud Walton to Oakland on December 30th at Bud Walton. So you have more time for the same and get yourself ready for the SEC. All right, the SEC. Lunardi has 13 of the 16 teams projected into the tournament, 2 more on the bubble. So 15 of the 16 teams arguably in contention. The lone team with 3 losses in non-conference play, 8-3 South Carolina, who just beat 25th ranked Clemson, who we know has the only win over a top 5 ranked Kentucky team on its home court, of course. We know it's hard to compare scores in college basketball, but South Carolina has moved up to 85th in net. They were 99th. They're 85th after that win over Clemson. But that's the lone team in the SEC that's not on Lunardi's bubble. It's the only team in the SEC that's not ranked in the top 58 in net. I mentioned 85th for South Carolina. Arkansas at 48th in net. There's only 2 teams ranked lower than Arkansas. It's LSU at 58th and South Carolina at 85th. So this is the crazy. I've never seen a league with this level of net rankings, projections for NCAA tournament in volume. I mean, and then you look at the record of the SEC against the other, what I call high major conferences and teams. We throw this Power 5, now Power 4 around in football. You still hear Power Conference when talking about basketball. But I guess if you want to say Power Conferences, I call them high major. But it's the SEC, Big 10, Big East, Big 12, and the ACC. There's 5. Throw in Gonzaga right now. Throw in Memphis. Those are high major school basketball programs. Throw those in. But if you look at the SEC's record against other high major or power conferences, it's 59-17. That includes Oklahoma's comeback win last night over Michigan. 59-17. That's basically a 78% winning percentage. If you look at the other leagues that we talked that I just mentioned and went through, I think there's 3 of the 4 that have as many as 24 wins. Only the Big Ten, I think it's the Big Ten, has a winning record against the other leagues, but +2 in that department. The SEC's 59-17. My math, that's +42. The Big Ten +2 with 24 wins. I think, again, a couple of the other conferences are over 20 wins. One of them's down in the teens. But you have to add up all the other wins against other conferences for the other conferences and to have a comparison to what the SEC is doing. It's unprecedented. The 14-2 mark against the ACC is just part of the story when that in that challenge week before last. It's insane how good it is. And you look at those net rankings, there's not a quad 3 or quad 4 loss opportunity the way it looks now on this. Just looking at Arkansas' schedule, the South Carolina game on the road in March would be a quad 2 result. And then only 10 ranked spots away for South Carolina by the time you get there, moving up to top 75, where that would be a quad 1 win opportunity. Quad 1 at home is tougher to get because teams have to be ranked in the top 30, but there are plenty of those in the SEC, and a lot of them are on Arkansas' schedule. So if you look at it going into it, there are only quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities, which can bolster your resume. It can sink it if you don't win games. The only thing that can hurt now, it's not going to be bad losses. It's going to be not enough wins. Arkansas is still, again, close enough to the bubble. Win these next two games, that's not going to change much. They're still going to be probably in the 40s in net at best, maybe 50. But there are teams higher in net right now that Lenardi has on the bubble. Texas and Missouri, he's got them in, and they have better net than Arkansas. Texas just barely. Missouri a little bit better, quite a bit better in net, but they're not in the same esteem because there's other factors than just the net. And again, Arkansas, the 2-2 mark away from home is a strength. It's a strength. And one of those wins being against a top 25 net team in Michigan. That's a little extra maybe. All right. But having said that, and not sure where this Arkansas team's exactly trending, I think they're getting better, and I think they're getting all hands on deck kind of momentum here. We'll see what plays out. But having said all that, and knowing the strength of this league and what that looks like, I can envision some historic, unprecedented things like a 6-12 team. There could be a 6-12 because remember, every game is an equal sum, is a net sum situation. You've got a winner and a loser, and so where last year Tennessee, I think at 14-4 won the SEC. You had 4 other teams at 13-5 that tied for second. I could actually see a 13-5. Not only winning the SEC, but maybe even a 12-6. I'm not saying there's not a team good enough at the top, but I think teams like Auburn, Tennessee, maybe Kentucky, Alabama, certainly, maybe Florida. There's 4 or 5 teams that I look at right now and go, that team could be in the Final Four. If you look at I mentioned Lenardi and how many teams he's got projected in. 3 of his 4 number 1 seeds are from the SEC. So when you've got that many teams that are that good, there may not be one team that can roll through it and have only 3 or 4 or even 5 losses. And you're going to have maybe a lot of teams bunched up in the middle there at 10-8, 9-9, 8-10. I think 7-11. I think there will be teams with a 7-11 league record they're going to get in. And I feel like there might even be a 6-12 finish. Think about that. Winning 1 out of every 3 of your league games and still being on the bubble and maybe being good enough to get in. Someone just put a comment on the SEC's big and bad, but come the tournament, they won't be. Well, so far, they've been really good against teams that are perceived that are really good from these other, high major conferences or power conferences. But, this is November and December. We'll see. But I think playing against really good teams, night in and night out, only makes you better when you get to the postseason. I think it only improves your chances of running a gauntlet through the NCAA tournament because it's not like just because all these teams are good in the SEC, they're all the same. There's different styles and ways to play. And you're going to have all kinds of opportunities to grow from wins and losses against teams that don't play like you, that don't look like you in terms of how they do things, but certainly have great coaching. That's undisputed, and a good host of players, whether that's a combination of portal and high school talent. But there's so much of it up and down in this league. I think the teams in the SEC, I mean, I would think there will be an SEC team that wins the national championship this year. I think it's the odds are in their favor. It's not saying that it will happen, but the odds are there, I think, to favor the SEC over any other conference producing one. UConn had 3 losses in a row, has played a brutally tough schedule so far, and come postseason, that'll be a team that's probably going to be a tough out. I wouldn't completely rule out the Huskies being that kind of team. A lot of first-round exits last year. I understand that. But I don't think the SEC, as good as the league has gotten, I don't think they've ever been this dominant against other high major leagues. No league has. That's the point right now. No other league has been this dominant when they play in non-conference against each other that the SEC is right now. And we know for years it's been the Big 12, again, at different taking turns, Big 12 in the past, Big East, ACC. The game has changed, but there's always been a conference or two that are maybe consistently perceived as the best because they kind of prove it a lot. Sometimes they're overrated. We've seen the Big Ten go through stretches where teams are overrated, but not the whole league. I mean, again, there's usually still bottom feeders that are not, that provide a bad loss if you lose it. And some leagues have fewer of those than others. The SEC doesn't have one right now. There is not a bad loss in a 16-team league. That is unprecedented. And so I do think so this Arkansas team is so interesting because the individual pieces, if everybody's healthy, I would have said coming into the season, we did say this. I said top 3 or 4 in the SEC, a top 10 to 15-ish ranked preseason team, preseason 16th. Some projections had them, most of them had them 3rd or 4th, somewhere in there. That was about right. I got that about right. It was based on the individual pieces on paper and what I'd seen from them. How does that mesh, though? How does that come together? We couldn't afford attrition. Talked about that because you didn't go very deep in how many you brought in. You went 9 deep. Let's put aside the fact that Arkansas has other guys. They're effectively walk-on value players. They're not guys that you're going to be able to turn to, and Arkansas hasn't turned to deal with some of this attrition. So attrition was always an issue. So that's still a question mark going back to that. But let's just say that looking at it on paper and what we thought coming in, I saw Arkansas again in that range of how it should look preseason with the potential of being a deep run NCAA tournament team. I've been on the record saying that, and maybe a final weekend kind of team. I go back to Nelly Davis because I think even if Arkansas is fully healthy and guys are playing what we think that they would, I said a dude kind of rounding into showing me that he might get there, that even Nelly Davis is still a wild card because my projection was based on him being the guy. And it's not to say that other guys haven't been the guy, but I kind of thought Boogie Flan was going to be really good. Maybe not as good as he's been. By the way, SEC Freshman of the Week, after averaging 18 points, 8 assists, 3.5 steals, 3 rebounds in those 2 wins over Michigan and UCA. So SEC Freshman of the Week, that's Arkansas's first award after a week of the non-conference. So that's good. So even though other guys have stepped up, Adu Thurio, none of us saw us producing like he does. But I have a fear that there's a little bit of fool's goal in there because I'm not sure that you can run when this competition gets better. It's not that he's not going to continue to score in double figures. I just don't know at the end of tight games that you can run stuff through him. Because he's not really a shot creator. He's so it's not picking on him and being negative about him. Some guys are showing me more than I thought on paper they might, but I don't know that necessarily counterbalances that role I was projecting. So I want to be proved wrong. Maybe Nelly gets to a point where he's doing a little bit more and it's not exactly what I envisioned, but it's a perfect balance with what other guys are bringing. Maybe Boogie, Jeremiah Fears with that 30 points last night, a freshman. Asa Newell having a big freshman year for Georgia. There's other ones in the conference really showing out right now. Boogie Flan in that top 5 group for certain. And so maybe he's that guy. Maybe he's that guy and will be that guy. He certainly stepped up that way against Michigan on his back in his hometown. So maybe there's something there. So I can't fully dismiss that. But having said that, Arkansas, to me, if I'm projecting it now, going through all this, I would say this looks like a 9-9 kind of team right now in the SEC, with the potential to be better than that. But that would get you into the NCAA tournament, because again, you're picking up, quad 1 and quad 2 wins in those 9, and then you're going to have some losses in that range as well. But you probably get in that way if you're Arkansas. Some other teams would certainly get in. There could be an 8-10 team whose resume looks a lot better than Arkansas at 10-8, just based on the fact that Arkansas didn't necessarily do a lot in non-conference other than survive a bad loss. And people say all the time, well, your record in your league is not all of it. It's the full body of work. That's true. And they'll also say, well, look at your record. How many of those games how many of those wins were really quality wins? Well, I just went through it. All the wins are going to be quality, quad 1s and quad 2s. And now that really maybe the non-conference stuff will be what the tipping point for how teams are seated in pecking order and things like that when the dust settles. But again, kind of walk the dog here a lot. Are there teams like Auburn and Tennessee and Alabama? Are those the 3? If I were going to pick 3 teams now, I would say those are the 3 teams that are the most likely to win this league, just based on how I view it right now. And maybe be 3 teams that are up there with 4 or 5 losses as we get to the final week in league play, in the final week of the regular season before the SEC tournament. Maybe they separate themselves and everybody else. There's more bloodbath, similar records. That's possible. But I think the league is so good, it's also very possible, again, that your league champion could have, 5 to 6 losses. That wouldn't shock me. And I'm over an hour. I do this all the time. We haven't even talked to some of the non-conference stuff that I wanted to do. But hats off to the SEC. It's always been a football league, and you've seen momentum building to this being a strong basketball league. But this jump to not only being the best, but right now, I mean, it's not like we're 2 weeks into it and this is too small a sample size. It's not it's still not the full picture. But once you get out of non-conference play and you've dominated like that, again, now you're just going head to head, and there's going to be back and forth on this and wins and losses, and it's not going to create a lot of slippage necessarily in the full picture for the SEC when the dust settles at the in the early part of March, when you get finished with league play around the country. But Arkansas's non-conference schedule next year, John Calipari's already started talking about it. He mentioned on a radio show recently that Arkansas is going to have Baylor in at Bud Walton Arena. Now, this few months ago, when he was talking about what Arkansas was going to do upcoming, I think some of it wasn't clear. Was he talking about at some points it wasn't clear. Was he talking about an exhibition game? Was he talking about a regular season game? So sometimes you have to kind of wait to get some more information. But it sounds to me like Arkansas is going to host Baylor in a non-conference game in Bud Walton Arena in the regular season. That's what my takeaway is from that. I doubt it's going to be bringing Baylor in for an exhibition game, but I guess it could be. Arkansas had Kansas in. I guess that's a possibility. I'd like to think that's going to be a regular season game. So for right now, as I'm dreaming about the non-conference that Calipari's somewhat vaguely hinting towards some things, that's part of the dream. Okay, that's a regular season game. He said again, he's recently said he wants to play in New York City again next year in December around the holiday season. He liked what he saw with the Arkansas fan turnout, the atmosphere. We know that area up there, he's done well up there in recruiting and coaching and other things. So it's familiar to him. So that makes sense. And then now you're looking at another marquee kind of a game that's made for national television, and one of those all eyes are on this game tonight kind of a thing. And so for the New York City, if Arkansas does return, one of the things I threw out in a tweet, including the Baylor news, was, I'd like to see UConn for that. I posted this over at HogvilleNET, and I saw some interesting comments on it, some different takes on it. Some people like the idea. Some are like, well, that'd be like a home game for UConn. I mean, that'd be good for Arkansas, I think. It's also a neutral site in the sense of it's not technically on the other team's home court, which gives, like in the NCAA tournament, you'll play on a neutral court, but it might be more of a home atmosphere for your opponent. Sometimes they talk about your draw in the NCAA tournament often impacts your path. And sometimes you have those kind of games where it's like, well, crap, that's more of a home game for them. That's not neutral. Well, I think having games like that early are fun. And UConn is a standard right now for East Coast basketball in the country, really. I mean, they were back-to-back national titles. But the idea being, you look at this schedule this year, Arkansas played 3 Big 12 teams. When you look at the 2 in exhibition season plus Baylor on a neutral court in Dallas, you have 2 Big 10 teams in Illinois and Michigan. You do have the ACC SEC Challenge. But maybe throw in some flair and hook up with Big East. Is a really good league year in and year out. UConn, the standard. Villanova's been up there. Marquette's one of the time. I mean, Xavier. I mean, you go down the list. Creighton. There's some opportunities maybe to catch a matchup like that. I'm just dreaming. It's dreaming. It's my dream, a thought. There are other matchups that would be great in New York City, but I threw that one out there. Calipari's repeated a couple of times now a game in Chicago. Again, are we talking exhibition? I'm going to dream that it's a regular season game. And I start thinking about it. Well, you could play, that's a neutral court. It's a big, it's one of those situations where you could either play kind of a regional matchup. It's not too far for Arkansas fans to get to. You could play a Michigan State or a Kansas or an Indiana in Chicago, and it would kind of make sense, and fans could, pack it out, your home fans. Or you could do something interesting and just play, maybe a headline opponent that's not in the region. And I threw in a couple there. I think UCLA was one of them, maybe Gonzaga. You could certainly put matchups against those teams out west or somewhere else, but we don't know. I'm not going to expand my dream beyond too much of what Calipari's already said. So he said Chicago, so I kind of threw out some of that. But it's interesting. It brings up some interesting possibilities. When he said Dallas and Kansas City last time, those worked out to be Baylor and Illinois, and those were good places for fan bases to get to, both for Arkansas and those other teams. Chicago a little further out of that footprint, a little bit for a lot of Arkansas fans, but it's still reasonable. And certainly, again, if you do a regional matchup, and again, I'm using Kansas, Michigan State intrigues me. Getting Kansas in the regular season obviously does. There's a history of Calipari himself having those kind of games, and they did it in this last exhibition season, kind of a last minute deal, I guess. And then Indiana's another one, that it's still a name out there that's probably underperforming relative to how they recruit, because they've done a pretty good job in recruiting at times here with this current coaching staff. So those are just some ideas there. The other one is the ACC SEC Challenge. Arkansas will host a game. You alternate. It'll be year 3. Arkansas beat Duke 2 years ago, so I don't see Duke coming back in. The team I put out that I'd like to see is an obvious answer, North Carolina. It's just a blue blood name, and they still have really good players. They underperform under the coach they have right now, in my opinion. But under him and in recent years, they've been in a Final Four and been to a title game. The year that Arkansas lost to Duke, speaking of Duke, in the Elite Eight, North Carolina beat Duke in Krzyzewski's last season and advanced to the title game. And so I'd like it to be North Carolina. Some other ones out there that might be intriguing to host a game would be like a Louisville, maybe. Louisville, new coaching staff, maybe going to make a turn and be a respectable opponent. And it's also got a brand name. Just throwing out some ideas there. There's a ton of possibilities. The ACC is a deep league in terms of, options. A lot of that planning is based on the perceived strength of your team and the team from the other league, and they try to kind of make games that make sense. But so we'll see on that. I don't know. But North Carolina would be kind of my wish there. The other thing is, if the SEC, everything I've seen is that the SEC in the summer in their meetings talked about they're considering expanding to 20 games from 18 to 20. But I haven't seen anything that it's been ratified. So as far as I know, there's nothing official on that. As we get close to an hour and 2 minutes, I'm going to wrap it up. But having said that, If they do expand to 20, it's going to reduce your non-conference from 13 to 11. And if that happens, this year, I was kind of opining for Arkansas to add a fifth marquee game. They only got to 4. I thought they were probably trying to work one out with a fifth team, and they ended up with Texas San Antonio in between that Michigan and Miami game at home at Bud Walton. They couldn't make that fifth marquee matchup for whatever reason. But I think they were efforting to. So I would hope that if they've got a 13 game non-conference schedule next year, that they'll get to 5. We just went through 4 possibilities. Baylor, the ACC SEC Challenge, obviously Chicago and New York. Maybe there'd be a 5th one. If you're down to 11 games, you're probably going to cap it at 4, especially knowing that the SEC play doesn't hurt you in terms of quality win opportunities and quality losses not hurting your resume so much. So you're probably going to leave it at 4. So that so those are just things to kind of, as we wrap this up. Hour and 11 minutes. I've done this before. In my mind, I somehow envisioned today with all these talking points, 45 minutes. I typically kid myself. I talk too much. Thanks again for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I've enjoyed this. And I'm enjoying this Arkansas run right now. I think most fans are. As we say goodbye, again, I think the biggest thing with this Arkansas team, 4 wins in a row, can have a perfect December for the first time in 4 years. And it's the perfect way to lead yourself into, especially if you're getting healthy and getting all guys hands on deck, and you're playing some of your best basketball, to lead into what's going to be a brutal night in, night out SEC schedule. If Arkansas ends up being a top 3 or 4 team in the SEC, like I projected preseason, and they end up being a top 15 ranked team in the country, they're probably going to be in that scenario a 3 seed at worst. That'd probably be what it would turn out to be, which would be great. All right. Thank you for joining me once again. Subscribe, like, and share if you haven't already. We're going to jump back in here likely Saturday for an in-game and post-game on North Carolina A&T, as I'm likely to stay back here in the 501 for that game. I might end up going, so if I go, it'll be a post-game. But until next time, and if something breaks in recruiting, we're jumping back on. But until any of that in the future, thanks for being here. Take care, and I'll see you next time.